Howdy, Immortalium here, and today I'm going to be reviewing Blood Feast. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Blood Feast, I think it's important to note the director of this film, who is Herschel Gordon Lewis. Now, if you haven't heard of Herschel Gordon Lewis, he was a film director who produced a lot of content, but arguably his most famous content that he produced involved splatter films, and this film in particular is often seen as one of the first, if not the first, splatter film, as in a film that actually shows and kind of revels in gore. Now, considering that this movie was released halfway through 1963, it's quite fascinating from that perspective to see a film like this be gory. But of course the question is, as always, is Blood Feast any good? And that's what I'm going to be discussing today. So let's get started. So what is the story of Blood Feast? Blood Feast is set in Florida, where there is a killer on the loose. He is killing young women and is taking some of their body parts. And we actually witness one of these murders right at the beginning of the film. Very quickly we find out that this killer is committing these deeds in the name of the goddess Ishtar. And he is planning to use these body parts as part of kind of a ritual for this goddess. Now, while all this is going on, there is a policeman looking into the case, but they are struggling to find any clues that will lead them to the identity of this killer. I also think it's important to note early on that the killer in this film also runs a catering service, and this well-to-do woman comes in and asks him to prepare something for her daughter, and the man ends up recommending that they have an Egyptian feast. The woman is quite ecstatic about this, as her daughter is into older kind of Egyptian history and lore, so she requests that the man prepare the Egyptian feast in about 2 weeks or so, and that is kind of the setup, the premise of the film. So with regards to the story, in terms of its quality, I would say that it's very, very average. There is no suspense at all with the killer, and the film does slow down quite often to show us him going after some women, or the policeman talking about, you know, the lack of evidence that they have, that they can't really figure out who the killer is. The film is quite brisk at 67 minutes, so even these kind of slower moments do go by relatively quickly. And as you begin to realize this killer's plan, there is some genuine tension that is built up towards the end of the film. So yeah, while the story itself certainly isn't anything to write home about, in fact it's a very basic story, it does serve its purpose of at least getting us from point A to point B. The characters themselves don't have particularly much depth to them. The killer is just someone who is obsessed with his goddess Ishtar and is willing to do anything in order to please her. The lead policeman on the case is a really nice, good individual who basically has no flaws. So yeah, you'll certainly not remember any of these characters for their depth or their character arcs or anything. But I don't think that was really the point of this film, and that's something that I'll get onto in a little bit. But in terms of the story, I would say that its brisk runtime actually does a lot of favors to it. And I would say that it is ultimately successful for what it wanted to achieve. But you have to keep in mind that you're not going into this film for the story or the characters. What you're going into this film for is the special effects, the gore, the blood, the guts, etc., etc. And in 1963, this was a relatively new thing. The Hays Code was still in effect, even though the prominence of the Hays Code had kind of waned and a lot of studios weren't really following it anymore. So this was very much new ground in terms of gore. And the special effects themselves are very kind of weak by today's standards. One aspect of the special effects that I definitely want to bring up, besides the fact that the blood itself is a bit too bright to be kind of depicted as realistic blood, is how some of these gore scenes, which I'm not going to show in case YouTube goes ballistic, but for things that are meant to be removed, as I mentioned before, the killer is removing parts from these women. A lot of them kind of look like they had stuff added onto them instead, you know, like a bloody fleshy lump. And certainly by today's standards it's not particularly great. Now there is some other decent stuff in there. There's some decent prosthetics in terms of, legs, severed legs. And there's a very famous scene to do with a tongue. The tongue in question was apparently, I believe it was a goat's tongue or a sheep's tongue, something like that. So those are quite respectable for themselves. And watching this film, knowing that it's from 1963, I can't help but wonder what it must have been like back then. To sit down and to watch this film and to see all of this gore and viscera, even if it isn't particularly convincing, it's still very groundbreaking, at least for the time. So from that aspect, the film is quite fascinating to watch. With regards to the music for this film is very basic. There's big stretches of the film where there is no music, and actually that absence of music actually serves quite well in many of those scenes. But a lot of the other music in the film can feel a bit pantomime-y, a bit too on nose. Now there is a distinct bit of music that involves the use of a drum, which definitely stands out. So I call that drum sequence, despite the fact that it's arguably the most basic piece of soundtrack in the film, probably one of the better used ones. But the rest of the soundtrack very forgettable and just barely serves its purpose of making you feel what the movie wants you to feel. Now, with regards to the acting.
Yes, Mother, of course I am. Only, I was reading about all those murders, and it sort of takes all the joy out of everything.
It's not great. To be fair, the scene I just showed you there is the bottom of the barrel. That is probably the worst acted scene in the film. The man who plays the policeman, who is looking into the case, is arguably the best actor in the film. He helps to hold the film together. He brings a little bit of gravitas to many of the scenes that he's present in. But the rest of the cast is very mixed when it comes to her performances. As I showed you, that actress there, she wasn't particularly good. Neither was her mother, although her mother was better than her. And the killer himself, he plays the role almost like he's trying to channel Bela Lugosi from Dracula.
Yes, Mrs. Fremont. I do cater to unusual affairs.
And he comes off as a bit too cartoonish. So yeah, the acting in this film is a real mixed bag. But, that's kind of what you expect with this film. This was a low-budget film being made to try to capitalize on the idea of shocking gore, etc., etc. And it was only filmed across 4 days, so I doubt there was many retakes when it came to the acting. In regards to how it was released, so the version I have here is from Arrow. I got this as part of a box set that contained 14 Herschel Gordon Lewis films. And this box here actually contains 4 films in total. But with regards to Blood Feast itself, so the presentation of Blood Feast is actually very nice. There's a lot of detail in it. There is a lot of blurriness, but I suspect that has to do more with the source material rather than the actual transfer itself. So I suspect that Arrow did the best that they could given the poor quality of the masters. And to be fair, compared to some of the other masters present in some of these other films, Blood Feast is in surprisingly good nick. Besides that, we have some other very juicy extras here. We have an introduction from Herschel Gordon Lewis himself, as well as an audio commentary from him and a producer on the film. We have outtakes. We have a discussion from some filmmakers on the impact of Blood Feast and how important Herschel Gordon Lewis ended up becoming. And we have some other extras. So it's actually a very, very strong package for a film like this. So definitely Arrow, they did a fantastic job with this arguably very kind of mediocre, but in many ways groundbreaking film. So overall, what are my thoughts on Blood Feast? Blood Feast isn't a particularly great film, but I also wouldn't say that it's a particularly bad one. It's just a very low budget film that it has a lot of rough acting, a lot of rough writing, and a very basic story in order to be able to show gore for the first time to American audiences. And from that perspective, it's actually quite an important film. So while I wouldn't say that it's a particularly good film, I do think it has a lot of historical value. So I think it is definitely worth watching if you're into horror, particularly gore, to watch this film, to get some kind of an opinion on it and to kind of appreciate this film's attempt at introducing gore to the masses back in 1963. So those are my thoughts on Blood Feast by Herschel Gordon Lewis. Of course, as always, I would absolutely love to hear what you guys think of all this. What do you think of Blood Feast? Have you seen it? And if you have, did you like it or dislike it? Are you aware if this was the first film to introduce gore to American audiences, or if there was some film prior to that that had already done that? What are your thoughts on Herschel Gordon Lewis himself as a director and his works? And of course, if you have any additional information about Blood Feast, about Herschel Gordon Lewis, about splatter films, etc., please leave it in the comments below. And of course, I would encourage you to use my affiliate links in the description below. When you purchase horror through those affiliate links, not only supporting me, not only supporting the channel, but you're also supporting the horror industry. So I'd highly encourage you to purchase your horror through those affiliate links. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and bye-bye.